I think I'd love to start off with your background in the fitness industry and what made you start and everything leading up to where you are now,
Sure.
obviously. Uh, Chad, I'm guessing this is for you as well, since we don't have any recordings of our last conversation.
Chad, go ahead. Take it away.
So how I got started in fitness?
And in general, I'm guessing summary of your journey in the fitness industry.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's probably a similar story to a lot of us. I grew up playing sports, like all the different Pee Wee League sports, season or two of this or that, and never really found a sport that I loved or that I was good at or came naturally. And that wasn't until like wrestling and martial arts and the end of high school. Got really obsessed with that kind of when the UFC was making its first big push in America. And I went to college kind of reluctantly and didn't know what to study, but knew I loved training. And there was this exercise science degree thing. I was like, hey, I'll do that. So started doing, my first degree, my 4-year degree, bachelor's in exercise science and health promotion at Florida Atlantic University, and got a job at the campus recreation and fitness center. Began doing group fitness, began coaching different sports that I was interested in. And it went from wrestling and taekwondo to bodybuilding to strongman to powerlifting. Eventually I got an intern position with Division I teams there. And I worked with 16 of the 21 teams, right around 500 hours, like somewhere in between 500 and 600 hours of experience as a intern strength coach. And that was the kind of the final step in my 4-year degree, but I didn't really feel like I knew enough of anything. I always had more questions than like I had good answers. And there was a new faculty member that year named Dr. Michael Zordos, who has since become very prominent in daily undulating periodization and strength research. And he was my first mentor. So I would go into his office basically every day. I knew that he was a coach when he was a grad student like me. And I just asked him questions about strength and conditioning. And then eventually he asked me to stay on as a grad student and work with him there in the muscle lab rather than go into, I was looking at like UNC, Chapel Hill, and a couple other schools. And, I agreed. And that really is what kicked off the most productive years for me in terms of developing myself as a fitness professional. We built the muscle lab. We did all of our first projects. Every year we were doing between 3 and 4 projects under Dr. Zordos. He taught me how to read research. He taught me how to ask the right questions, how to, pull the tidbits out of research that was really applicable to people, since he came at it from like a coaching perspective as well. And yeah, he developed me, just as a human being. And that really kept me motivated and kind of like stoked that fire that I already ignited. And that's really where I found my niche, was kind of being this a practical scientist, but also practicing science. So I have a problem that I want to solve in myself or my athletes. And it's a problem for me because there's no answer in the literature yet. So how do I make the most well-designed study I can to answer my problems and then also help other professionals out there that are reading literature, trying to answer the same question. And that was really it. And it's, kind of been down that path ever since. We talked in episode 1 about how I joined the Army 2 years ago. So I've kind of taken a sidestep from that development as I refocused on my second career, my new career path for the time being, but just waiting for the chance to kind of, step and have them both kind of meet and go down the same road.
How's that been going, by the way?
I'm all done with training, so hopefully I'll be able to start to have more control over certain things, and like the talent management will be a little bit different, because right now, when you're in training, you're not necessarily in control of your unit's fitness protocols and stuff. But when I get to my unit, if I'm the most qualified individual on that team, then hopefully I can get control and I can work with people one-on-one or divide them into different, groups, kind of stratify them into different groups by ability levels, and try and apply the same coaching principles that we'll probably talk about today to those in my organization.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, how about you?
So my background is different than Chad. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. As a massive sports fan all my life. I played almost every sport for 1 or 2 years, but very few stuck. Sports that I was actually into growing up were curling and golf, and so those are my favorite ones to this day, to play at least. And I was an overweight kid, so when I was 15, first year of high school, I just had enough with it, and I went to the gym. My friend, who's a natural bodybuilder at the time, took me to the gym. I fell in love with it. It was a lot of fun to build myself up in there, and the aspect of trying to create a program that would work best for me to get me to where I wanted to go the quickest and the healthiest was something that, like, I think from week 2, I knew it was really interesting. So when I graduated high school, I enrolled myself in the personal fitness trainer certificate program at Mount Royal, it's basically like a light kinesiology degree. So it's your university level anatomy and physiology courses, strength and conditioning methods, stuff like that. But you're not taking some of the other general education courses that are required in an actual 4-year bachelor's degree. So when I finished that, through that course, I had been exposed to periodization and program design and like Russian training principles and stuff, which aren't really that influential on what we do now. But at the time I thought, like, that's really cool, and I want to learn more about it. So I decided that I had to take a few courses I didn't in high school, and then go back and get a bachelor's degree in health and physical education. Basically the same thing as kines, a different title, so that I could find the knowledge I was looking for. During that gap year, I started the Strength Guys as a social media outlet only. The goal of the Strength Guys was never to be a company. It was to network with people so that when I finished my degree, I may have some possible opportunities and openings here or there. So during my gap year, and at that time I was training for powerlifting, I guess a mix of powerlifting and bodybuilding, really. But during my gap year, I would just tweet out thoughts that I had on training. I would talk to people on Twitter every day and, just get to know what the community had to offer and who the experts were and who was performing well and all these things. And that got a good following. By the end of the gap year, people started requesting if I had training services online. And it was never like, I was always like, no, we don't. But I think the nice part of that was that the market was saying that they had a demand for what I could provide. So I started to sell training programs and started to write training programs for people online. Originally for bodybuilding, our first year of operations with TSG was very specific to natural bodybuilding. And that's what I was training for at the time. Competed in natural bodybuilding as well. We had a few prominent figures in the fitness industry earlier on, and outside of the fitness industry. We had Jeff Nippard was one of our early on clients, as well as Leanna Carr. And Jeff Nippard kind of was the spark that really helped TSG to get going in terms of building awareness of our coaching operations from other people. Because, yeah, Jeff was a natural bodybuilder, but he wanted to get into powerlifting, and getting strong was really, really important to Jeff. And so that's why he hired me as his coach, to get him strong. And I think whenever someone who looks the part is getting really strong quickly, that's something that the internet audience really like takes its attention to. And it's like, what's going on here? Like, this guy's a professional natural bodybuilder, and you know, he's close to squatting 500 pounds and deadlifting 600 pounds. Like, that's pretty amazing. What's he doing? So people started hiring us. Around that time, I started working with a NASCAR legend, Mark Martin, as well, who's now in the Hall of Fame. He's retired. But he had interests in bodybuilding as well. And so I started training my first driver in professional motorsports while I was working with Jeff at the time. About a year later, a former professional athlete, best way to put it, Taylor Atwood, had just finished his professional football career in the Canadian Football League as a running back with the BC Lions. And he was looking for a way to continue to compete, but he had never done powerlifting or anything. He found out about Jeff Nippard through a friend who also trained with me in the small town in Minnesota that he lived. And Taylor signed on. And 4 months later, Taylor won the 2014 USAPL Raw Nationals. And our group started to shift away from working with natural bodybuilding towards working with powerlifting, because Taylor's performance at that Raw Nationals, like, it tied what the world champion was capable of doing at the time. And it was a really like notable thing in the USAPL. And of course, now Taylor has the longest consecutive winning streak of a open men's powerlifter in the USAPL. He's won every national since 2014 up to the current date. So he's currently at 6 in a row. And our following has grown a lot as a result of that. Met key figures in our group like John Downing and Alfred Jong, you know, within the following months after that Denver Raw Nationals in 2014. And powerlifting really became a prominent thing. In 2016, a few years later, I really wanted to scratch the itch that I had with strength and conditioning, because I grew up an avid sports fan, basketball, football, soccer, or as Europeans will call it, football. All these things were massively interesting to me. And as Shad mentioned, UFC and mixed martial arts, like, I remember the old figures like Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell, and those things were so cool. And an opportunity presented itself to go down to Los Angeles for a summer and to intern under strength and conditioning coach Brett Bartholomew at a gym that was owned by Chuck Liddell, amongst others. So I interviewed for that, and Brett said, as they say in Hollywood, you got the part. So I went down to LA. I got to learn how professional athletes train and prepare for their seasons in the off season. I got to see Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell train pretty much every day, which is pretty cool in itself too. And it was just very eye-opening to see, to learn about strength and conditioning and how different it was to bodybuilding and powerlifting. And also to see how applicable my skill set was in the sector of sports science, which is really looking at the data side of strength and conditioning. So athlete testing and athlete programming, determining what it all means, and then making decisions off of that to enhance the results. So I took that back, and Taylor Atwood and I were now preparing for 2017 Belarus Worlds. Taylor was coming off of second place at his first World Championships. He lost the World Championship at lockout due to a technique issue the year prior. So you have to have your knees fully extended in powerlifting, and he pulled the weight and just didn't quite fully extend them. He just forgot in the moment, and we lost. So we wanted it to be our year in 2017, and in hindsight, I think I may have taken the wrong approach in spite of my best efforts, because I approached Taylor's 2017 Belarus Worlds under the mantra that basically being recovered and rest is a weapon for an athlete, like being fresh and able to perform. And so I don't think we trained hard enough throughout the year. Taylor made incremental progress, but when the training got hard right before the competition, Taylor got injured. And we ended up posting a disappointing 8-kilo personal best and placing second that year. About at that same time, I had a few interviews with different NBA teams in the National Basketball Association for sports science positions or strength and conditioning positions. And it was such a discouraging experience for me that I contemplated quitting powerlifting and just going into professional sports science and saying, you know what, I've won 2 IPF silver medalists and I've coached numerous national champions. Like, that's the best I've got, because I don't have a massive background as a powerlifting athlete. What I've had to learn is from mentoring. And I think I am the example of how you can become a high level and high performing coach from finding the right mentors, doing your due diligence into studying and specializing in coaching, and just working your butt off and being very reflective on where my weaknesses were and where my strengths were, and really working hard to bring my weaknesses up to create, I think what we now have at the Strength Guys is it's the most innovative platform in powerlifting. So I had a call with Ben Escrow, and Ben Escrow is the joining figure of how I met Chad as well. Ben Escrow was the coach back then who was winning meets that he shouldn't have been winning. His clients would show up at competitions and they would beat the more talented athletes. They would regularly make 8 or 9 out of 9 attempts, and they were just getting so strong. His most prominent athlete was Lane Norton, who has won numerous national titles and placed second at IPF Worlds. So I think being Lane Norton's coach really put Ben on the map. But at that time, he also had a world champion in Eli Burks and Masters world champion in Lisa Randazzo, and he had so many good lifters on his roster. And I was explaining to him how I was at a lack of inspiration right now after Belarus Worlds, because the end result for Taylor in 2017 wasn't that way for a lack of trying. I just took the wrong perspective, right? And Ben's like, well, why don't we train Taylor together? And I'm like, sure, sounds good. Because to be honest, at that point, I was like, if I can't get Taylor to the results that he's capable of at the next competition, I'm out. Like, I'm going to go find a job in sports science somewhere and continue to work in sports where I can be effective. So our first competition together, coaching Taylor, he showed up in Florida and he was unreal. He had a 750 kilo total as a 74 kilo competitor. He had lots more in the tank. And all the issues that Taylor seemed to have in Belarus were gone. Like, he had enough stamina to get through the meets without getting tired before deadlift. And overall his execution was so much better. And it was the exact opposite approach that I took for Belarus, where I'd say for Belarus, it's the mentality and the mantra that recovery is a weapon. And I want Taylor to be fresh in order to stay injury free and to increase his performance. And for nationals, it's hard work is a weapon, and we're going to outwork everyone. Like, we're going to do more, we're going to accumulate more training load than our competition is. And we're going to do that in a systematic way so that we're not exposing Taylor to too much too soon or anything like that. And it worked so well. A few months later at the Arnold Classic, Taylor totaled 782.5 kilos, which actually beat Russell Orhe at the Arnold Classic weekend in terms of highest total amongst 83 kilo competitors, even though Taylor competed at just over 74 kilos body weight. We won our first world championship a few months later in Calgary. And then this past year in Sweden, Ben and I coached 2 world champions together in Eli Burks and Taylor Atwood. Taylor was also named the best lifter in the world, so that was pretty cool for our group. During the time working with Ben, we really worked at taking his training system that was so effective with his clients and polishing it and refining it and equipping our athletes with as many of the resources that they needed in order to be successful. And I'd say that that process of taking the ball and making it basketball was really what has propelled our group to new heights. It's also brought on excellent members like Chad and numerous other group members who are new over the past few years of operation since Ben joined on. Most recently, I have gotten into sports science with the Calgary Flames professional hockey team. I am their sports science template provider, and maybe it's a goal in the future that I would like to work with an NHL team. I think it would be so cool to be a part of a Stanley Cup winning team and Stanley Cup winning staff. So that's kind of moving ahead what my thought process is, and very dedicated to my coaching in powerlifting and strength and conditioning as well. As TSG is almost 10 years in operations, and we're a successful country that's in over 40 different, or successful company that's in over 40 different countries around the world. So that's my background.
Okay, I think I got a lot of questions just from your story, but I think the first thing I want to know is, Chad, how did you get into this company? How did you guys get together and started working together?
Chad, I'll let you tell that story.
Okay, so similar to, well, Jason already mentioned, like, Ben Esgro was like our link, like the common denominator in our relationship. And yeah, I was kind of similar. I would say to Jason, there was a time where I started my company, Myogenic Training Systems, in 2014, while I was still under the direct mentorship of Mike Zordos. And Mike and Ben were basically like peer mentors. And then at the time, they were like pure mentors to me. Like, we weren't peers at that time, right? I was Mike's student. Ben was, you know, Mike's associate. So by effect, like, they were above me, and they were kind of equal influences on my ideas as a new strength coach. Once I graduated in 2015, and I had worked for Ben at De Novo Nutrition as a technique coach, mostly with his online clients, for around a year or so when I was finishing my master's. Once I graduated and continued to begin a doctorate that I didn't complete prior to the Army, Ben was more of a friend and a peer mentor, and same with Mike. Once I graduated, we became like family. So he is also like very close friend and peer mentor as well. So I was doing my own thing in a new place. I had just transitioned from a very strong group that I was deeply rooted in into like a completely new environment. And I was trying to figure things out and like spread my wings and do things my own way. And I found myself like severely missing the back and forth of, you know, a mentor or just someone else there, a peer. And I talked to Ben about it a few times, and I talked to Mike about it a few times. And I wanted to join a team. And Ben told me about him joining Jason with the strength guys and recommended like I reach out and essentially do the same thing. And the strength guys, I was familiar with the strength guys back in 2014 when they first started as like a social media brand or figure. And I was kind of aware of them ever since. And I thought it was a great idea. Any chance that I would have to work with, you know, Ben and Mike, I was always going to take it. And then of course, like it got to introduce me to people like Jason and Alfred and John and Brandon and everybody else we have at the strength guys. And essentially, I think it was a couple phone calls via Skype with Jason talking about our perspectives and our goals and how we approach things to decide that it was most likely going to be a good fit, and then to kind of work me on at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, which was about 9 months or so before I joined the Army, which then caused me to take a break for about a year and a half before I had enough freedom to slowly start to come back and get involved again with the strength guys. And that's kind of where we're at now. It's been about maybe 5 months or so since I've had the ability to like come back and start doing things again.
Mm-hmm. And you guys have experience coaching each other, right?
Yes, that's correct. During Chad's first kind of stint before he joined the Army with TSG, we prepared USA athlete Quentin Myers, bench press only, for the Raw Bench Press Nationals. Quentin he's a longtime client of mine, and I wanted to have a new perspective on his training because he's quite a big guy. He's made the U.S. national team as a 3-lift competitor, but due to certain injuries in his lower body, he just couldn't train the squat and deadlift well enough to continue powerlifting in 3-lift format. So he went to bench press only, and bench press wasn't his strongest lift when he went into bench press only. He had placed 3rd at Raw Nationals the year prior as a 59 kilo competitor, which is quite light. So together, Chad and I took him under our wing, told him he should compete in the 66 kilo division. We added 20 kilos to his bench press in a few months. I think it's like 6 months of prep time. And Quentin actually ended up stealing the national championship away from the favorite at that competition. He qualified himself for his first Worlds as a bench press only athlete. Another guy that we work with is Chris Wong. So Chris Wong was the Great Britain representative in the 74 kilo category for the 2017 World Championship in Calgary, Alberta. And Chris came in, he signed up 12 weeks out from Worlds. He came in nominated around 13th in the roster for Worlds. So outside of the top 10, didn't really look like top 5 was probable for us. But Chris Wong ended up, I can't remember the exact number, hit a massive meet PR at Worlds, went 9 for 9 for the first time in his life, and actually placed 5th. So he moved himself up from 13th before the competition to 5th place at the end of the competition. So those are a few of the success stories that Chad and I have worked on together. Chad has also been behind the scenes engineering performances and running strategy during Arnold Classic wins for Taylor Atwood and Sean Moser. back in 2017. So we've had exposures of working together online to prepare athletes for major competitions, and also at an actual competition with game day coaching.
Mm-hmm. And do you find it difficult coaching a client together? I mean, do you clash at any point with your opinions or anything like that, or do you kind of split the workload?
No, I think the thing that's been nice about coaching in teams, co-coaching we call it, is that it's what I said about different people have their strengths and their weaknesses. And if you could find a working partner as a coach where, like the analogy of strength and conditioning, right? I think a strength and conditioning coach has to be so great at developing speed, developing jump height, developing conditioning and endurance, and developing strength and muscle mass. And it's like the whole spectrum of athletic ability. And that's a tall order for someone who knows all of that, right? And so I think inevitably athletes end up getting a coach who's stronger in some areas and weaker in others. And they develop stronger in the areas where the coach knows what he or she is doing. And they kind of suffer in the areas where the coach doesn't know what he or she is doing. And so to bring that back to powerlifting, it's just finding a match of, okay, like this person is a really strong strategic thinker, sees the big picture well, analyzes data well. I'm a really creative guy. I'm able to present that data, build relationships with our athletes, analyze that data, and make decisions on it. And so that's where we found that we meshed really well. And Chad can tell you more about how that's worked.
Yeah, and also, if with my background in collegiate strength and conditioning, you have a head strength coach, an assistant strength coach, the strength interns, and then the team sport coach. So everybody has a different responsibility. In the weight room, like we're the bosses. The head strength coach is in charge of certain teams. The assistant strength coach is in charge of different teams. And then we take that plan and we work with the athletes to make sure that they do that plan, right? And we kind of troubleshoot on the fly and make modifications as needed, because they've got 600 athletes, but I might be concerned with one rack of 8 for that given team. And then we have the head coach and the assistant coach of their sport that come in and they're like, this is what we've got on the horizon. This is where these players are lacking. These are the drills we're using for this position or this group of players. And then again, I take those tactics and I go and I do it. So it made sense to me, the idea of co-coaching. It just made inherent sense. And then outside of collegiate strength and conditioning, if I think about my time in the lab as a strength and conditioning researcher, there's the principal investigator, Dr. Zordos, and all of us that have basically a shared understanding and equal parts in accomplishing the goal of conducting this well-controlled research experiment. So again, we've got someone that knows more than us, and we are actively contributing in the development of the project and then the practical application or implementation of that project. So the same thing that I had seen in multiple areas of the strength and conditioning field, I wasn't seeing online for the most part, because even other coaching conglomerates or groups like TSA, I don't know if like they team up and coach athletes together, or if it's just a straight system of baskets or buckets and all of these athletes belong to this one coach. Whereas like Jason said, he's got strengths, I've got strengths, we've both got weaknesses, so we can complement each other's strengths and also make up for each other's weaknesses in different ways, and just provide an overall better product, service, and experience to our athletes. And it makes sense. Even when you look at CrossFit, for example, they've got gymnastics coaches, conditioning coaches, Olympic weightlifting coaches, general strength coaches. Like they've got all of these different specialty coaches that they work with to develop themselves, a single athlete, to do this like multimodal or almost multi-sport event. Powerlifting has 3 lifts. You know, it's pretty linear, but there's an infinite number of ways to develop an athlete. And the more perspective and the more experience you have behind that one single athlete in that linear path, you know, it's just a smoother ride. It's just a better experience.
Yeah. We've also built our team in the past 3 years around the idea of hiring specialized expertise. So now we have a team physical therapist who has written injury prevention protocols for core work, or maybe like active recovery days that an athlete can perform in order to keep them healthy or to return them back to training from an injury. We have Kedrick Kwan is located in New Zealand. He's doing his PhD under Dr. Eric Helms, and he's doing his PhD in weight management for powerlifting. And he's also a sports nutritionist. So we have an expert weight cutting guy. We've got kinesiologists with brilliant and detail-oriented creative minds, and Alfred. We've got a guy in Dr. Brennan Roberts who keeps our entire team up to date on the latest research in the scientific community, so that what we're doing is current. And if there's any edge that can be gained, we're going to get that edge. So when we work together now, and we also have coaches who are better at, percentage-based programming or RPE-based programming, like they have their backgrounds there. So whenever there's an instance where I want someone's expertise to weigh in on a plan, I could just hit them up and say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And it's so much better than saying like, this is what I know, because this is my background and experience, and I'm going to train the athlete in the only way that I know. Because now we're able to find more solutions in different ways.
Okay, so first of all, I gotta agree with you on the matter of this is what I know, this is how it's going to be, because one of the biggest drawbacks I see in coaches is that they kind of get stuck to one way of developing their athletes. Unfortunately, most of the time it's the way they coach themselves or something, and if it doesn't suit the athlete, it's just kind of set up for failure. Now, you guys mostly coach, obviously, strength athletes, and some of them are coaches themselves, I assume. Is there any difficulty working or coaching other coaches to run into disciplinary problems or adherence problems with them running off with ideas of their own and kind of hindering progress?
Yes, sometimes. I think the difficulty is when you've coached enough, like already like elite level athletes, you get to see like people at the top level gain strength and express their strength in different ways. Like an example is working with Owen Hubbard or later Sean Noriega. Like both of them have fantastic arches on bench press, and they have very minimal range of motion as a result. And so it's not your typical bench press training program when you want to take someone who's already got the world record on bench press and you want to make them even stronger, but the range of motion is, 5 to 10 centimeters long, right? Because there's not much muscle damage that's occurring there. It's very much more of a skill than it is doing a rep with more range of motion, like it is for most bench pressers. So being able to identify a strategy that would improve their performance requires creative thinking, and it requires problem solving because it's not a normal situation. So those are examples where we've really had to morph our approach to that athlete. I think other examples, it's people going off program because they feel really strong and maxing out. And sometimes when people do that, they can bounce back pretty quickly, and it's not an issue because they recover well, and it doesn't really like make their next few workouts any less in terms of quality. But there's other times where an athlete can max out and it can really hold them back for a week or longer after that because of the time that it takes to recover. So that's the man management aspect of coaching, where you've got to be able to discipline the athlete and encourage that they are training the right way. Our way is, you know, you're hiring us, you're paying us to do a job, you better follow the plan, and not tolerating it when they don't. So being able to discipline someone and so on and so forth. So yeah, we have gotten into all that in the past.
Chad, do you have anything to add on the matter?
Yeah, I think a lot of times the way I approach working with even coaches, even if I take off my coaching hat and I'm an athlete and someone else is coaching me, I look to them as an educator because I've clearly given them, you know, hold of the reins, the control over this certain situation. So whenever, actually a majority of the people that I have coached are also coaches, but I kind of have a conversation with them about their background and what exactly they're looking for, and kind of establish our limits prior to just getting directly involved with the coaching process, so that I treat it like I'm trying to educate this person so that I no longer have to coach them. And I think that's really effective, and it builds trust, and it builds buy-in in me as a coach, as the expert or the person that they are looking for this specific guidance. And that allows a lot of freedom in me trusting them that they're going to do whatever I ask them, and then also them trusting me that I'm going to ask them to do what is in their best in their best interest, right? So it's self-serving for them. And there's still, you know, cases where they make modifications, but as long as they can almost predict whatever I would have said if they texted me and they're like, hey, you know, a pipe burst at my gym last night and I was up all night like doing repairs, so I didn't do this percentage, I did this, or something along those lines, then it's usually not a big deal. I very rarely have problems with individuals who are coaches themselves going above and beyond what I asked them to do because they just felt good that day. That's usually something I find in a less refined lifter, someone that's just more excited about the whole process than someone that is working with me to almost gain a specific skill through me coaching them so they can then coach their clients with it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to backtrack to the first story that Jason was telling about trying to strategize the recovery and trying to outwork, but not to the extent of completely fatiguing the athlete.
Yeah.
I wanted to get some of your thoughts on individualization, and whether it being progress, volume, intensity, and recovery, especially when you're talking about athletes that you're not necessarily with them the entire time, meaning maybe, like you said, a pipe burst and something happened and they just go off script or just can't stick to the script, and how you analyze that data that you've collected once you see these points that you can't really control in the athlete's progress.
Yeah, so we have our own nomenclature for, there's 5 different phases of training that TSG uses. And I'll only get into the competition prep for now. Like, let's say we're 12 weeks out from a competition. The first phase is the preparatory phase. And this is something that it was absent for Taylor and Belarus, because the goal was to train consistently and not to ramp volume up so high that we would be risking injury, because he had just a string of strains and injury troubles that we didn't want to go back to. And that was my first hypothesis in how to manage that. And what happens is, eventually in powerlifting, if you want to increase your performance, you've got to train, and you've got to train hard. And if you're not prepared to tolerate training hard, if your connective tissues aren't prepared, if your aerobic system isn't prepared, so you're not able to recover in time for the next session, you're going to fall apart, and you're not going to be able to. And so the preparatory phase is a phase where you're doing higher reps and lower weights. So people would call this a volume block. And the goal of that is essentially to improve the athlete's ability to train. The physiology of that, is that you're improving their capacity to perform work. Once an athlete's ability to train and recover from training and tolerate it has been improved, we then add a lot of weight onto the bar, and we go into the next phase of training, which is the development phase. And generally, the development phase volume is still quite high, but now you're doing less reps per set and more weight. And so preparatory phase volume is where we achieve something that's called peak volume, so the highest volume of a competition prep. And at development phase, we may do 3/4 of peak volume, right? But it's relative to where we were. And there's more sport-specific practice, and this is where athletes will actually get stronger, right? And then finally, in the competition phase, now we're at our most specific training. So generally, reps are always 5 reps or below. And a lot of the training is structured around assessing the lifters so that we can put together an effective meet day strategy for them. In fact, that's what our peaking program is structured around. So it's evaluating what the lifter's opening attempt should be, and then based on that, evaluating what their second attempt should be, and we're practicing it over and over and over again. Like, I'd say by the time our lifters have gotten to the competition, especially like our top tier men and women who require more training, they may have already done their opener and second attempt 10 to 12 times each. Like, they're very, very, very well practiced. And so when you put that kind of practice on the platform, it just goes really well, right? Because now you've created a strategy based on realistic expectations, and you've already practiced 6 out of 9 of the lifts to the point where it's automatic for you. So in actuality, all we have to do on game day is select what the third attempt is and watch what's happening in the competition itself so that we can manage our strategy. Where that model works for, I'd say 7 or 8 out of 10 of our clients. Now, where it gets tricky is when people don't respond to that model, which is individualizations, right? I have athletes who could do sets for days, like high volume training, they can get better with it, but as soon as that insanely high volume of training isn't there, as soon as it's removed, their strength will drop right back down to where it was before. The solution for the athlete that I'm referring to was actually just having her work up to an RP 9 or RP 9.5 single twice a week on each lift, and then do a few back down sets. It's not a style of training that we use often, but her strength, she gained more strength in 8 weeks than she had in 2 years prior, trying the volume-based model and getting that to work. It was truly amazing how responsive she was to intensity. Other examples are working with Owen Hubbard or Sean Noriega. Standard bench press programming isn't going to get it done. And so for Owen Hubbard in particular, who I worked with for a longer period of time, what Alfred and I did was for the World Championship, where he set the world record last year against Brett Gibbs, we said, all right, your training winner at maximum is 500 pounds, even though we don't think Owen could have done that. But what that did was it made everything that we prescribed harder for him. And we trained his bench press until he was blue in the face in preparation for Worlds. It was high volume from start to finish. He hit peak volume on bench press during the preparatory phase. He trained at 95% of peak volume with heavier weights during the development phase and 90% of peak volume during the competition phase, where he was doing the least amount of reps. And so I think twice per week, Owen was doing 10 sets on bench press, and he was bench pressing 4 times a week in order to accumulate that kind of volume. But he was absolutely unreal once we peaked him for competition, and he was able to set the world record. Other examples are great deadlifters like Jure Roos, who's the European champion in 2017, and Sean Collins, who is the 5th ranked lifter. He's world class, but USA is just stacked in powerlifting. Who's the 5th ranked lifter in the nation in the 83 kilo category in the United States. Both of those guys, when we applied our standard training model to them, every work set that they were doing was a rep PR. They were just not used to training that hard. And as a result, they were not able to recover, and they just didn't have the energy to actually get better at deadlift. And so what we're experimenting now with both of them is a much lighter, much easier, or in Jure's case, a 1 day per week training frequency, which is something that we'd almost never do with most of our clients. Because it's not about following our training system and the rules that work for 7 out of 10 people. It's about identifying what's going to work for an individual. And so it's generally our starting point is our training system, because I believe it's best in the world. I think our results indicate that. But if we need to evolve away from that, we will. Like, we're not married to using the classic DUP style that we use. And we will make changes to find the right solution for people.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go about deciding when to do that? How do you analyze the data that the athlete is giving to you?
So right now, I think there's 2 main physiological concepts that I'm thinking about when I'm writing a program for someone. Because in a daily undulating periodization scheme, you have a higher volume and lower intensity day at the start of the week, and a lower volume and higher intensity day at the end of the week. That's just general theory. For powerlifting, you always want to bias more of the training volume towards intensity, because that's the most specific day of training for the athlete. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is, if I'm adding a lot of volume to the first day of the week, the high volume and low intensity day, what am I actually making them better at? Like, am I improving their work capacity, or am I improving their strength? And if I give them, too many sets on day 1, so now volume is very high on day 1, I could cause muscle damage and a recovery debt that the athlete will not be able to bounce back from for the remainder of training. So by doing too much on day 1, I could essentially impede performance for the rest of the training week, when the weights are honestly more specific and more important for powerlifting. So I'm thinking about the concepts of work capacity and muscle damage. And I think overall, I haven't seen it be successful for athletes where every work set was a PR because they were training so hard. Like, both Jure and Sean Collins are able to do that. They were able to complete the training. But you're just not seeing the adaptation that we would usually see on the other end of it. And so it's taking a step back and going, maybe they just can't recover enough to actually adapt for the next session and improve their performance in training from the way that we're training. And so let's take a step back based on this physiological principle of work capacity and recovery, and see if a less frequent or less intense or less voluminous approach would be the answer for them. And if that doesn't work, okay, let's try to add more, right? Like, let's see if a more voluminous or more intense or more high frequency approach is the answer for them. And it's looking at the spectrum of the athlete and the different situations which they could adapt from, and considering physiology and letting physiology guide these decisions when we're doing it. That's how we individualize.
Mm-hmm. And Chad, do you think that your background with data analysis in research helps you sort of, I guess, tailor it a bit better for your athletes that are problematic with their recovery or their adaptations that are not as expected?
Yeah, so I do, and I'm going to bring this full circle, but I think it's important to kind of take things Jason was speaking about because it directly applies to the same question and scenario that you've posed now. But the individuals that we've been talking about mostly are exceptions to the rules of periodization, or the principle, the different physiological principles and the different models of periodization, right? Those are like the rules. The exceptions don't make the rules or write the rules, they define them. So most people, myself included, will be able to follow the models of periodization, and you'll see the principles of physiology like manifested like to the T, to the letter, right? Very simple example is Jason described some of the nomenclature we use in TSG, which isn't some sort of mysterious proprietary knowledge. It is how we've kind of operationalized the periodization model, where preparatory period in the NSCA basically is the same thing that we use. But instead of our transition period being so drastic, if you look at the images that you would find in the NSCA textbook, where you have that crossover effect, and that's your first transition period. Ours is a little bit more mild because we're trying to get the most we can out of the repeated bout effect and progressive overload. So with those physiological principles, right, progressive overload, you need an overloading stimulus to improve the repeated bout effect. Your recovery systems will essentially be trained to the level of performance or demand you place upon them. And therefore, the 10 sets of 10 German volume training that you might do on day one of your program, where you can't walk for a week, doesn't affect you the same way as 10 sets of 10 will at week 10, because you've built up your ability to recover. You've elicited the repeated bout effect. You've trained it, right? And that progressive, that overloading stimulus is not so astronomically overloading anymore. So you're garnering less of an adaptive and destructive effect. And then, you know, the traditional model would go into the competition period, which is pretty similar to our peaking, where we're trying to achieve the peak intensities and peak specificities of the entire training cycle, just like they would. And then similar to the NSCA, the second transition period or off season is a refresh or a different.
Now we're looking at general work capacity. So actually like
right.
aerobic fitness and doing a lot of exercise variation to strengthen muscles and joint angles that we don't strengthen during powerlifting from an injury prevention perspective, and also for some bodybuilding and growing muscle and coming back into the next competition prep a bigger athlete. But yeah, what Chad was referencing there is it's basically the thing that the textbooks lie to you and they say that they suggest that you should drop volume off way more than you actually should for powerlifting performance. And what I was referencing were the exceptions, because the question was on individualization. But like I said, like 7 or 8 out of 10 individuals who train with us, the reality is that their performance, how to solve their performance puzzle is to have them work harder and work more specifically at back squat, bench press, and deadlift. And that answers a lot of questions, and it gets people better quickly and powerfully, and it's easier to prepare for a competition strategically when you practice this way than any other style of training I've seen.
Right. And understanding what is applicable to your population from the body of literature is important. So Jason has a lot of practical experience, and he has a lot of like school, right, street smarts and school smarts or book smarts in this realm. He understands the literature and he's seen it in practice. So when we look at the diagram in the NSCA textbook and we understand its origins in traditional sports, our background in strength and conditioning, we also understand how that's an apple and what we've got over here is a watermelon or a power lifter.
Yep.
So you're not going to be able to do a 1-for-1 transfer. So we're intimately familiar with the information and we're intimately familiar with the athlete, and that's where you can start to parse out where is this athlete an exception and where is this athlete a rule. So my background in strength and conditioning research, very similar. The hardest part of having human subjects is making sure that you're accurately defining the population you want to represent, and you're accurately sampling that population. So you have to have very stringent criteria to bring them in, because everybody in a study has to be a rule. If you have an exception, that's an outlier, and depending on the sample size, that can skew your results. So you have to have a very painstakingly detail-oriented process to recruit and stratify and make sure that at the start of the study, to the best of your knowledge, everybody there is a rule. Everybody there is playing on an equal playing field. And then you apply the intervention, which, you know, online, it's our powerlifting program. In the lab, it's my research study, my protocol. You apply that intervention and you don't touch it. You set it and you forget it. You don't influence it one way or the other. Which is very different than obviously what we do as coaches, right? We're trying to stack our deck with our athletes, but if I'm doing research, I'm pretending like I'm completely, you know, oblivious to everything else except for what's written down in my protocol. So having experience in all of those different realms, and then having to analyze data and figure out where it fits into the bigger picture of the field of literature as a whole, and if I'm looking at a result, what does this result actually mean to the next sports science lab, you know, in the neighboring state or city or university or across the world? Like, is this important to them? Am I analyzing, understanding, and presenting this tidbit of information in a way that is meaningful to them? Or am I just looking for meaningful statistics to put, you know, asterisks and significant findings in my paper and get it published? So by going through that, and again, always looking at most of the research we did at the strength, the muscle lab with Dr. Zordos, like, we all have problems that the research has, because we all look to the research to guide our training. So at the end of the day, we're all looking for, like, what's going to make us bigger or stronger or better, but also what fills a gap or a need in the literature. So yeah, I think that experience was very important. It's something as simple, the commonly used example of scale weight versus weight loss progress and like body composition, right? If you don't have a conversation with the individual whom is dissatisfied with their weight loss progress about how they're actually conducting their measurement, what intervals, what, you know, control, what frequency are you doing this? Like, are you standardizing anything, then that data is basically meaningless. And therefore that extrapolation of I cannot lose weight, this diet isn't working, is false. So that's been very helpful with working with online clients, because you take the same idea and you look at bench press performance and you begin to look at what you control long term, and then you begin to look for outliers when performance goes one way or the other that you're not expecting. Like, what's going on to make this go really well, or what's going on to make this go really poorly? Are we lax in our controls because we're comfortable? Are we overlooking something? So I think it's very important, because it's a continuous cycle of analysis and reanalysis and kind of recalibrating what is important and what is controlled, or what you're kind of lax on.
Okay.
Did that come full circle for you, Igor? I didn't want to get lost there.
No, that was good. Now, since it is getting kind of late here, I did wanted to end it sort of with a question that's not very relevant to what we've talked about, and well, it's kind of old news by now as well. But I did wanted to get your takes on the new deadlifting record we have, and subsequently the apparently fight we're going to have between Hafthor and Eddie Hall. Sorry.
Yeah, I we're quite separated from the world of World's Strongest Man. We don't do anything in strongman. Right. 500 kilos is a lot of weight, so that's amazing. Number one. Number two, I think our focus has to be on pushing the performance of natural athletes as high as it can go, and not a knock on Eddie and Hafthor at all.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
By all accounts purposes, they're not natural athletes. So it's outside of our range of focus. And I think that the thing that doesn't appeal to me about enhanced, meaning you're taking performance enhancing drugs, strength sports, is that we're still seeing natural athletes in powerlifting do insane things and make progress far beyond what we thought the limit was 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. And so I guess I would challenge people out there who are intrigued in performance enhancing drugs. If you're just looking for a quick fix, which obviously Hafthor and Eddie are not, right? They're looking to be the world's strongest man, and now they're looking to beat each other up. So I get it. But for the recreational gym goers who's looking for a quick fix, I can understand the perspective of why they would look towards anabolic steroids, although I absolutely don't agree with that. For an athlete who's looking to maximize their performance, I would challenge them to try and do so naturally, because I haven't even seen a world champion athlete who has stopped progressing yet in the IPF in the, I guess now over 6 years that I've been involved with it. Everyone's continuing to go up and up. And so it's like, if even the best are able to make progress, I think that competing on drugs honestly is a cop-out. So I kind of disagree with that entire scene, if you will. But I think Hafthor will win the fight. He's my pick.
Mine as well. And that's an interesting perspective, and I definitely agree with you. And from a coaching perspective, I guess it's kind of a cop-out as well. Just because your athlete is taking drugs and you can just maximize volume beyond what any natural lifter can do is kind of, I guess, can kind of challenge you or your abilities as a coach to actually elicit progress.
Yep.
And Chad, any thoughts?
I actually don't know well enough the events preceding the monstrous deadlifts in both cases, but again, like going off your last question, if this was pre-testing in the sports science lab, like the 72 hours prior to, you know, the event, we would want some sort of control to make sure it was basically an equal playing field. So the validity of each lift, like, is not for me to decide. I can't even conceptualize how heavy, you know, 1,000 pounds on a bar is in my hands. However, if I'm thinking to my own training, when, you know, I do deadlift first versus deadlift last on a training session, if I'm maxing out, I know that I'm going to have a better performance on one versus the other just based off of what I did that preceded that event. So if, you know, the physicality leading up to both deadlifts was different, then there's an argument that, you know, maybe there would have to be a retest with both individuals doing the exact same events leading up to the deadlifts to like settle any sort of disputes. But regardless, it's an insane amount of weight for both individuals. And I have no idea who is going to win, but, you know, if you've ever wondered what it would look like for like two asteroids to collide in outer space, I'm pretty sure you're going to see, you know, something pretty similar in that ring.
I don't think it's going to be a good boxing match for boxing purists.
Definitely not.
I think it will be two insanely oversized men just wailing away at each other in the ring. So
I've seen some of their training, and as a guy who's been boxing since he was 8 years old, it was kind of atrocious, but definitely I can see the attraction in it.
Yeah, it will be interesting, and hopefully both guys emerge safe as well from the end competition. So
yeah. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for joining me and doing this podcast together. And if people want to talk to you about training or even hire you as coaches, where might they find you?
You can find us. We're most active on Instagram at The Strength Guys. Our website is www.thestrengthguys.com. And we have a coaching section there. We have a contact us section there. So if you want to get in touch with our company, those are the best routes to do so. My social media is at JasonTSG. And Chad, I'll let you list what you want to list for contact info as well.
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on, I'm not active on any social media platforms, to be honest, but I will check Instagram. And it's just my name, Chad Dolan. Email chad@thestrengthguys.com. Will get directly into my inbox if you don't go through the website. And also, don't let the names of the Strength Guys to, you know, discourage any female listeners. You can also go to the Strength Gals, and we don't discriminate. Everybody needs to be strong. So that's a secondary effort that was started a few years ago that we're still working on developing and pushing into the light.
Okay, maybe we can talk about it on another podcast. Okay. So thanks guys again, and well, in my case, good night. In your case, I'm guessing have a nice day.
Take care.
Thank you. Good
Bye
night.
guys.